Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Don't have a big gift or anything just yet, but anything checks in the post.
Water is an action.
Yeah.
Cool. Good afternoon, everybody. So I decided to do something slightly different and go back a little bit to my roots, which is really just to introduce you to what budget work is. And to hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be a little bit more interested in budget analysis and advocacy work. So combining the two and becoming both thinking about it from an academic perspective, but also from kind of how you can make meaning in the world and do activist work. So a little bit about me. So I come out of the humanities. I have a master's degree in political studies. I did work on the ideology critique, so the theory of ideology in Black consciousness, and then needed to find a job. And for some reason, I didn't make it into the philosophy department at Rhodes, and I didn't want to stay in the politics department. So I got a job at the Public Service Accountability Monitor. And that was when I was then thrown into doing budget advocacy work. Now my maths abilities are 0. I stopped doing maths when I was 16. And now I'm doing all sorts of very complicated things on Excel. So budget work is very accessible and you don't have to be an economist to do it. So that's what I want to encourage you to think about. And the amazing work that you've been doing on the old age grant has shown that you can bridge these kinds of disciplines. So I also want to encourage you to think of this as an interdisciplinary area of work as well. And then I went on to work for the International Budget Partnership, which you would have read about in one of the readings. It's one of the top budget advocacy training technical organizations in the world. It founded the Open Budget Index, which countries sign up to. So we were part of the founding team. And South Africa ranks one of the highest in the world for budget transparency and accountability. So in terms of accessing information, this is one of the top places to be. At a national level, at local level, it's a bit more complicated and complex. But I worked across the globe, from Indonesia to Egypt to Brazil, training people how to do budget work. And so that's kind of one of the things I really love about this work. But I've always had an activist bone in my body, and I felt a little bit disconnected from South Africa. So I was based here, but I was working outside. And then I worked for Section 27 and the Treatment Action Campaign and did a lot of work around health budgets. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a poet. So in my spare time, I try and write a little bit about how I'm feeling, what's going on, what I'm thinking about. I have written a budget poem. And I raise a crazy teenage daughter. So what about today's session? And you'll all get to introduce yourselves just quickly now. So I'm going to do a little warm up with you all. And then before we even start talking about budget advocacy or budget work, and I'm going to use those interchangeably, is it a budget issue? So you might have a particular problem or question. An ideology critique for me was a huge question. The issue of Black consciousness was a huge question. Is it a budget question? Maybe, maybe not, right? So you have to have a link. It isn't automatically going to be a budget issue. But as you delve into it, you might find that there's an angle to it that has a budget component. For example, what kind of education framework is there? What kind of learner support materials are there that broadens people's understanding of Black consciousness within the curriculum? Are those materials available? Are people thinking about it? And then that might take you into a question about what's the resourcing for this particular area of work that you're interested in. Then a little bit about the purpose of fiscal policy. So why do we talk about budgets? As I've said, economics is for everyone. So again, I just want to reaffirm that you can do this work, even if you're a sociology student, it can be done. And then I'm going to take you a little bit into the South African state in terms of how we enter into it and look at it from a macro organization of the state and looking at it through the budget lens. and then the 4 stages of the budget if we have time, and then we'll end off with a quick quiz. So hopefully we're all in the same room. Did anybody do the readings? So I would like you to just introduce yourself by saying your name and what your favorite song is at the moment. Not your favorite song of all time, but your favorite song at the moment. And then we'll have a playlist because this is being recorded, and then you'll have your own special playlist afterwards. So we'll start this.
So my name's Tina. Favorite song at the moment is Definition. Working this week in media or MA, sorry, MA, thanks a lot. So, yeah.
Nice.
My name's Betty McGannon, and at the moment I'm obsessed with Only You by the Wagoos.
Cool.
Olá, Pauline, and right now I'm listening to Residual Self-Image by Ames.
Just obsessed with them.
With who? Oh, the Kendrick drama that's playing out. The last one he dropped, I have to say. Very good. Drake has nothing on Kendrick. I'm sorry, I'm putting it out there.
This. This is
Oh, okay.
Very broad meanings we need to and I'm obsessed with Kendrick Lamar and Africans.
I'm saying I'll have to say Arias. That's not I can't make it. So I'm also obsessed with like
I'll fill you in.
I'm gonna get it playlist.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca, and my current favorite song is called 8 by Can China Paul, and it's my favorite song right now. All Eyes on Me.
Mm. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Sankel. My current favorite song is You Were Inside Me.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I listen to a lot of Cuban music. My favorite song at the moment is called Young Love in the Evening.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Elena. My current favorite song for the last 3 or 4 months has been, it's probably old though, not old though, not new. Billie Eilish's What Am I Here For?
Oh, nice. Yeah. And my daughter just watched the Bob Marley biopic, so Redemption Song has been on my list, has been resurfaced. Cool. Okay. Very quickly, find a partner. I don't know if you want to stand or stay seated. It's up to you. And I want you to just think about, and you'll share your thoughts. List what you think government budgets are for. What do you think our government, the South African government, spends money on? Where does the money come from? And what do you feel should be the top 5 spending priorities for the South African government? And we'll hear your ideas. So pick a partner. I think you can go, if there's one group of 3, that's fine. And I'll just give you some time to go through that. Does everybody have a partner? You're in groups? Cool.
Only as I learned. I just got to see
Don't think too hard, just brainstorm what comes to the top of your head. It's not, you're not going to get marks for this. I didn't discuss that with Elena, so just throw it out there. Maybe quarter past, yeah. Yeah, I think we're doing okay. What did they say? Okay. There's a lull in the talking. Who would like to share their thoughts on the first question? What do you think the government budgets are for? Anybody, any group want to shout out your ideas?
Fiscal, saying financial, but also it ultimately involves the human. Just basically resource deployment. Number two, what do you think our government spends money on? Well, actually, consulting, they consult a lot, even
Okay.
for those mediocre things. Social services, that has been something that people have been constantly talking about, also in our post, and catering. Highly
Yeah.
underrated. There was a provincial meeting where they spent 500,000 just for catering.
Yeah.
So just like our SLC. Sorry. Number three. Or the SLC one, apparently they spent 88,000 in catering. That's another one. So 88,000 catering for 600 people. As reported by Daily Maverick, take it with a grain of salt. Number three, where does the money come from? Said from me, tax.
Okay.
So that's about it. Number four, what do you feel should be the top 5 spending priorities for the South African government? You said skills development in relation to job creation. Because when you just say skills development, you're implying that people are not skilled, but there is a huge pool of unemployed graduates. So that's something to think about. In relation to that, you think of infrastructure also. But infrastructure encompasses parts of housing, from not only just housing, things that build into the economy and feed into skills development and job creation. We want to create independent people, I guess. Number three, education. That's something where education is the key to success. And health, but health in terms of mental and physical health. And then we didn't do number 5, but we discussed that.
You got it. Great. Did anybody else have anything else? Yeah. Yeah.
So we said, when it's something, it's just different things that we said. When it says, what is the government? Number 2, we said business, the top 8% as well. That's where a lot of money goes. And then we said, where does the money come from? Taxpayers and debt. And then 4, we said UBI,
Okay.
housing, education, healthcare, and debt.
Okay.
But I'm not so well versed with it.
Okay. Good.
I think what we added is one of the where this money come from.
Yeah.
We also added 8 and.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Interesting. Anything else?
Sorry, number 4. Science disaster management, something that the government should have priority to spend. So this is more for government. And disaster management is something.
Yeah. And climate change, right? Very good. Okay, no, that's great. So that was just a way to warm you up and get you going. But this is what the government spends its money on. I don't think you can see very clearly, but and my colleague likes to say, I stole this from my colleague. He likes to say classification is the most important decision rule. So how you classify the spending is often a decision in and of itself. Debt service costs are what we spend the most on. So your taxpayers' money is spent mostly on servicing debts. Where there's a debt, there is a what? Interest. There is interest, yes. What else? Where there's a debtor, let me put it that way. There is a creditor. Yeah, rent. So this is where we are paying this money as the South African government. There are people receiving this money. So that is our priority. We are saying we are prioritizing what we call investor savers, which are often the top 10% or top 1% globally. So in terms of local financing and international financing, we are saying our top priority is that grouping.
Does that come with the same obligations as structural adjustment programs? Do we take out debt and it has obligations?
We have to be fiscally prudent. We have to behave. But we're a good neoliberal country. So I'm going to use some of these terms and we can go through them as we go along. But Patrick Bond argues that we have implemented structural adjustment of our own type. Okay. So even though we are not under structural adjustment programs, we have 1 or 2 World Bank agreements now post-COVID that we signed up to because of the COVID crisis. So prior to that, we were not under any structural adjustment policy program due to loans. But now you can argue because of those COVID loans, we're paying a bit more attention to that. The red actually is what we have defined and looked at through the Constitution around the constitutional obligations, so the constitutional objectives of the budget, right? And that's basic education, social protection. This includes grants and social welfare services. Then healthcare, and then community development, which is a lot of your grassroots, your local government, local economic development programs, your infrastructure, those kinds of things are sitting under EPWP. Higher education, and then social security funds is your UIF, and what's the other UIF? UIF, and it's just I've just gone blank. Skills levy, no, that's tax. Skills levy institutions, and then culture and sport. So you can see that the priorities, broadly, the South African budget is in line with a rights-based framework, if you look at the red. But don't get confused, because this just tells you how much they're spending and what they're prioritizing, right? It doesn't tell you the whole pie. We don't know the size relative to what they could be spending. So what we do know is they're prioritizing debt, then basic education, social protection, healthcare. But we don't know if they could reconfigure this, one, or B, could this be bigger? So that the amounts could shift in relation to the overall percentage of the government budget of GDP. So when you become a budget analyst, you always have to you move in between detail and big picture. You're constantly asking yourselves that question, what am I looking at and what is it telling me? Okay, so this doesn't tell you, it just tells you what the amounts are and what's going where, but it doesn't tell you, could this be a different picture? Okay, so we often get caught up in going, oh my God, which was the big news, was that debt repayments had overtaken education. This is a relatively new phenomenon. This was not the case about 10 years ago. And so, but still, all that's done is showed you a shift in priorities, but hasn't told us what the big picture is necessarily.
But you would get a pie chart, like you could get a pie chart.
You could, and you would want to compare it over time.
Yeah.
So ideally, what I should have done if I had more time is given you this compared to a period, an earlier period. So you could see, oh, what was debt versus education versus health. Yeah. You understand why that's important to make those? So you always, when you're looking at numbers, there's always a story to tell. Yeah. Okay. But not all public service issues are integrally related to fiscal policy, as I mentioned before. So what is it that you're interested in? What questions do you have about the world that you live in Cape Town or in South Africa? What are you interested in? What are you interested in? Education. Okay. What are you interested in?
Education.
Okay. Education. What are you interested in? Public health. What you're interested in?
It's like hopelessness as a.
Yep. So you would then say, for education, does the national or local government provide programs or services? Do you know who provides education in South Africa? For those of you who mentioned education.
Basic education.
Yeah, where?
Maybe secondary level.
Mm-hmm. And who's providing it? Is it private? Is it public?
Public
And
and private.
mm-hmm. Okay. And where do the budgets come from for education? Mm-hmm.
And parts local or district level also have to
Yeah.
take it.
So only provinces are responsible for education spending. So that's another thing that we'll go through. So when you start learning about the issue that you're interested in, and you're going to track it from a financial perspective, you're going to follow the money. You're going to literally go, who is responsible for this at what level? And the first place you start is the Constitution. The Constitution sets out very clearly who is responsible for what. And I didn't bring my Constitution, which I should have. Actually thought about it and then I forgot. And I was going to bring some budget documents and I forgot to bring them. But there's the cover of 2024 budget. So you also want to ask questions about, do you think that there's enough money going towards public health? And I was explicit there. I said public health, not private health, public health, right? So we also have to make sure we know what we're talking about. Are we talking about private education or public education? What are the implications of there being private and public? And how do we engage with that? Same with health. Does the budget distribute allocations among programs and services appropriately? So do you feel that these services are receiving enough of what they're supposed to? So if you're thinking about homelessness, you would say at a local government level, is there a budget for dealing with homelessness? Or is it a provincial issue under Department of Human Settlements? Who's responsible for homelessness, right? So you always ask, if you're interested in learner support materials, I use that as an example. Why? Because there was a huge, I didn't include it in the readings, I should have, and it was budget work, is that they dumped a whole lot of learner support textbooks, the textbooks crisis that Section 27 covered. And they didn't actually have to spend any money on textbooks. It wasn't legislated. And I'll come into more detail about that because that becomes important as well. And then are the funds allocated to address the issue actually reaching the intended beneficiaries? So that was the Sierra Leone reading. So they saw that there was an allocation for health, but it wasn't reaching the beneficiaries. And so they did a campaign to say, look, here are the scorecards. We need to make sure that these are accessing that money, that the funds that are needed are being accessed. Treatment Action Campaign has a Stop the Stockouts campaign. And that's looking at medicines and whether the medicines arrive. And they have to look at whether or not that's a budget issue. They found in the Eastern Cape at one point, it wasn't a budget issue, it was a human resource problem. Okay, there was a problem with the people in the warehouse. So do you see the distinction? But sometimes you come back to it being a budget issue. Why was there a problem with human resources at the warehouse? Because they've cut the budgets to personnel. And then you work your way back. So it's like being an investigator. That's what I love about budget work. But you're always thinking about the bigger questions around the right to education, accessing equity, fairness, justice. So it's not just a limited question about rands and cents. You want to ask the broader questions, and that's in the SJC reading. It really gives you a sense about, what they were fighting for was on one level, proper sanitation, but also looking at the questions of dignity, equity within the broader Cape Town budget. Yeah. Which reading?
Erin told Sophia's dead. She went bottom up looking during the Dead One scandal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So this just shows you that this is just another way of showing it. It's from a fantastic book. I worked with the team that put this book together. They were looking at the right to food. So, and sometimes what you're looking for is a mindset change. So it could be that here you have old age grants, but you want people to, like the one campaign that I followed briefly was around introducing a 13th check for pensioners at Christmas time. So that may not be a budget issue. It might just be a mindset change. Of course, it has budget implications, but it might be about, look, we want you to see the value of the pension in the broader system, and that at Christmas time, they should be equally able to provide gifts in the same way that other families can do if they have a 13th check. And then strong relationship to government budget. So to come back to the question around stop stockouts, there was a strong relationship with the fact that there would have been a cut to the personnel budget in the Eastern Cape. Direct relationship. But again, general to the specific. So you're interested in, we are concerned about the right to food. That's why I asked you, what are you interested in? And then I'll come to you. Where's the angle that's related to the budget?
So what happens when is it a budget issue? So I'm going to use like a real life example to take from the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape, there's a problem of malnutrition when it comes to kids and everything of that sort. And I believe the Department of Social Development also and health has to play an impact. And they were allocated a budget. Not really sure whether I should omit or add as well. It's either 20 or 200 million of that amount.
Yeah.
To give food packages away. But then they were stuck. They said, and they gave it back to the department at the end of the year. They said, you can't do it, you have to return it back. And then when asked questions, they said, no, we tried to contract their company, but the company had problems of that sort. Whereas you have the people that need it, necessarily in the budget implications. And it's not necessarily a mindset change because you know that people that need it. So what happens?
Yeah. So that's enabling factors. Yeah. So what is happening in relation to getting to that, addressing the issue that you're interested in? So you're always asking that question, and it's not. You'll see that it's not. Oh, sorry, I'm missing it. I thought I'd added something. So you'll see that it's iterative. It's not. You're constantly moving back and forward, and sometimes you have to go into your campaign for a mindset change. And sometimes you have to go back and look at the budget issue. So you saw that they wanted in the Sierra Leone issue to get the government to spend 15% on healthcare. So that might be a mindset change first before they get to the allocation. So getting that kind of, the right to health, a broader and more. So it's just about where you focus your energy and where you focus your attention. Yeah. Okay, so let's say we've established, given that we've got education and health and homelessness, and generally I'm of the opinion that most things are a budget problem. Throw money at it. That's my response. I'm not very popular amongst economists because you'll find economists like to say that it's not a budget issue. But I'm always skeptical.
And I think it's a budget issue in addition to implementation issues and
Exactly.
structures of how to deliver.
Yeah.
And your food relief example there was clearly not a matter of mindset change or direct intervention. It did both.
Yeah.
They were already convinced there's the money. They intervened in the budget, allocated money, but then they couldn't deliver.
Yeah. And they might not be able to deliver because of a policy that's linked to procurement, right? Which is a budget issue. So you always get back to budgets. That's my theory. You can study this further and then come back and say somebody gave a talk and said, what's nonsense? Okay, so what is budget advocacy? Okay, why we should include a focus on government budgets? It's because it's in the Constitution. And that's taken directly from the Constitution, the preamble. So we have a beautiful framework for guiding us in relation to why we focus on the budget, and also plays an important role in solidifying why we would be interested in making sure that public funds are used appropriately and the necessary resources and the wealth of this nation are employed in order to make sure that we live and improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. So I often just use that quote around free the potential of each person because it's such an important kind of mechanism of trying to talk about inequality, equity, justice, and so forth. And it's in our preamble. It's also about holding public and private power accountable. So that's the advocacy part of the work. So, and this is where you link your academic and activist sides, right? And that within the Constitution, Section 195, the basic values and principles of governing public administration is that it should be efficient, economic, and effective use of resources must be promoted. So we have a right to ask questions about the use of public resources, and we have a right to participate in policy making. So your research work on public health or education, you have the right to feed that back into policy making so that it affects change both at a policy level, but also at a budgetary level, right? The budget is policy. So often it gets a little bit confusing, but it is policy. Yeah, let me not jump ahead because I think I've got that. Okay. Yeah, and this is across government, right? So every sphere. So what is budget work? It brings research, the work that you do, and advocacy together. And budget advocacy is a combination of two traditions. So historically, advocacy work has been the domain of activists and campaigners, and budget research and analysis and academic has been the domain of academics and public finance experts. And it was seen as a technical exercise conducted by economists. But put together, the link that holds them together is evidence. Both advocacy and budget research become stronger and more effective when they are brought together in budget advocacy. So what I really want to encourage you to do is to think about your research areas that you're interested in and bring in the budget lens, the resourcing question. And that makes for a very powerful tool of both an interesting piece of research, but a very powerful advocacy tool. And it also gives relevance to your work if you are kind of thinking that you don't want to be too ivory tower, which don't get me wrong, I think my master's thesis was extremely relevant and important, and it sits on a shelf and gathers dust, and every now and again somebody quotes it, which I get very happy about. But I did kind of think, okay, it doesn't really have much oomph, like it's not going to influence. Whereas now I'm embarking on a PhD and I want to be able to say something meaningful about policy and influence the policy making process and give it relevance. So I'm bringing the two traditions together. Yeah, so a theory on ideology around austerity and fiscal consolidation. And fiscal consolidation and then kind of how that works. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. So what is this that I'm talking about? Okay, so it's the analysis of fiscal policy, revenue, so taxation, borrowing, investing, spending, public resource management. And it's the analysis of government's proposed budget allocations and revenue sources. So you can analyze revenue sources and budget allocations to see how they will impact on poverty or other specific developmental or social justice challenges. Analyze revenue plans or budget allocations, expenditures to see whether to what extent they advance or undermine economic, social, cultural rights. So a lot of gender responsive budgeting sits within that frame. So for those of you from a feminist lens, you want to see, is this dealing with social justice issues and equity issues and gender issues, or is it exacerbating them? You know, are we replicating unequal relations, gender relations? An analysis of revenue plans or budget allocations expenditures may be designed to shed light on a specific sector, which we've spoken about, so children, old age pensions, and then an analysis of the budget process, so around public participation. So the SJC one actually spoke a little bit about, I didn't give you the reading, I could have given you a reading on the actual analysis of the sanitation. They did a whole piece of work. I gave you the education one, which was the research, which was budget and analysis research. But there, that was around the participation process. So the ability of communities to be able to actually engage in the local government budget process. There was no real mechanism, or it was kind of, what is it, staged? I think they used, and I don't know if it's in that reading, but it's in another reading, where it's sort of a kind of a theater of public participation, but actually there was no mechanism for 3,000 people to give their submissions and for those submissions to be taken individually. You know, they put them as a block, which is not the process. It should be each individual can participate in the budget process for it to be meaningful. And you can do it as a block. You can do it, you know, so you can do it in multiple ways. The Open Budget Index was precisely about public participation and access to information. So I did a lot of work around access to information laws globally because before we could even talk about getting a hold of the budget, did you have a right to get a hold of the budget? And some places like Zambia didn't have an access to information law or a PIA, public promotion of access to information legislation that we have, for example. It's also about issues of accountability and oversight.
So, any example you gave in Zambia, has that changed now?
No.
So I would, is there anything between that kind of obligation to make things accessible and levels of borrowing and that type of thing?
So that was the push from which made me very uncomfortable, but it was very much the push that some of my colleagues at IBP were doing around the Open Budget Index, is to link it to lending policies. And it was adopted by the World Bank and IMF. They do use it. Yeah, they do. Okay, and then the other aspect is monitoring the implementation of revenue and expenditure. So that was the Sierra Leone one. They were looking at the actual implementation. So those scorecards were about whether or not people were, that the resources were getting to the ground in relation to health services. Okay, so evidence-based budget advocacy can be used to, I've spoken a little bit about this, empower ordinary people, the SJC example. And you as an academic can provide that bridge, right? So you can think, I'm sitting here, you have all the advantages that you have to access the evidence and make it accessible to ordinary people, which is very powerful. Inform public debates, bring about policy changes, improve the delivery of public services, promote more transparent, participatory, and accountable budget processes. So that's, you saw from the SJC case, they actually introduced a new unit to be able to deal with some of the questions around sanitation and enhance the credibility of advocacy efforts. So if you're wondering, but why is she talking about us becoming activists? It's because I want you to. I think academics can be academics and academic activists at the same time. So this was the slide. I just put it in here. I wanted to show you. So you have your issue, whatever you're interested in. This is an example of the right to food case. Somebody mentioned hunger earlier. So there you go. As an example. Analyzing the government's budget. So you're going to be like, who's responsible for it, where, what allocations, down to the Eastern Cape example. And you might go back up again or down again. And then presenting the claim. It's about the results of the budget analysis. And you're saying something about whether the government is doing good by its obligations to the right to food or right to education. And then you make it accessible in various ways. But this takes research and hard work, as you know. Okay, so the purpose of the budget we touched on a little bit. And I just want to go through it again because it gets confusing. So it's the government's money is the people's money. And the budget is always a political exercise that starts with political choices and about priorities and ends with political choices about which programs and projects get funded. So regardless of what you hear the minister say, and if he says we don't have money, that is a political choice. Okay. Everything you hear out of that man's voice from now on, and it is a man, in case you're wondering why I said man, is political. Economists love to pretend that they're not political and that they're like scientists. They're not. Okay.
Some of these like justifications would be argued, and there's like multiple side ways of seeing it.
Absolutely.
And so, for example, prioritizing debt, like we saw on the slide,
it's a political choice.
it's a political choice, but could be argued to say you are keeping our ratings, God knows what, you know, intact, and therefore the cost of everything doesn't go up, and no one comes to invest in the country, and then we don't get more jobs, and everything goes down. It's like,
yeah. So the most common argument which we heard at the debate was, oh, if we put taxes up, then everybody who can be taxed will leave the country. That's a choice. Maybe we could choose to let them go. You know.
Last week as well, we were talking about not the money
but not the money side, but the policy side of saying that there's always assumptions being made. And those assumptions are leading to political choices. Remember we were saying like there's assumptions being made about what a family looks like or how a family functions, and that informs the white paper. And then like however money gets spread in that, all of these are choices that aren't clear cut. It's all coming from some sort of like ideology, or assumptions are coming from ideologies.
Yeah, so it's not a fixed thing. That's essentially what I want you to understand. It's a highly political document. How many of you have read a budget? Yes.
Any kind of budget, it doesn't have to be the
Yeah, any kind of budget.
We all do budgets in our own lives.
Yeah, and you're making decisions, right? Am I going to go to the hairdresser this month, or am I going to buy that textbook? You know, at the moment I have this dilemma because I got my hair dreadlocked and now it's very expensive because I have to go to the hairdresser. Okay. So according to Parliament, the budget is oh yeah. So you're always doing that because there's always going to be some kind of policy in place and some kind of policy being developed, because we can always improve. So that it's a very dynamic process, right? And sometimes it's about preventing bad policies from coming in and keeping the current policy. The current policy might be okay, but it's not being implemented. And so it doesn't necessarily need a new policy. You just need to not have that crappy policy come into place. Or, as we see, there's some major questions we could be asking about how we structure our debt. For example, that amount that we're spending, we don't need to be spending that amount if we were more political about how we engage with lenders and domestic versus international lenders. And the majority of our debt is domestic. So we have a lot of leeway in this country to negotiate our interest rates. And one group, one organization, the Alternative Information Development Center, AIDC, has done some powerful work on how just some subtle changes to the tax regime and some subtle changes to the use of the UIF and the employment, the government employee pension fund could completely shift that picture and reduce that amount and push up all the others that I showed right at the beginning. And that is a political choice. We're choosing or not, and this is where ideology comes into it. Maybe we just don't have very good policymakers. Maybe they truly believe what they're doing and therefore hold a set of false beliefs about the world, that they think that trickle-down economics works. That if we look after the rich, everyone else will be better off under this system, right? So it comes to those more murkier questions around capitalism, neoliberalism. What does it mean to talk about the good life, and so forth? So it's exciting. It's good stuff.
Another like example of something like what you could do is some of the work that Elaine is doing now, where I think it was like 40% of people that we like estimate should be on the grants in aid. 40% of older persons, people who are receiving the older persons grant should be on the grants in aid, which is an extra 500 rand. But I think it was only like 8%, so 6% are. So in that space, like what it looks like when you have to give and take and move in this world, it looks different. So like what it could look like in that regard is we all need to advocate for everyone to get a grant in aid, because the structures are already there. It's just not being used. The implementation isn't there, or like people don't have access to the information about it. So that's like an easy way to get an extra 500 rand into so many more households. But you have to like, well, older person's household.
And you also have to do a bit of research to know what's going on with SASA. Because we think people are not applying, or people are applying and not, or is that people are applying and not getting it? We don't actually know the answer. So until SASA opens their doors to say, here's the number of applications we had, and here's the number of, denials,
then we get a sense, okay, actually like 60% are being denied for these reasons. We don't know those figures. They're not available at the moment. And there's that side to it too, you know, which is the case for the wider disability grant benefits applications too, you know, not just this particular one. They're all under the one umbrella as such in relation to disability. So you do need research like to allow you to know where to push and where to move in terms of your advocacy.
Yeah.
And there's so much room.
And it is a back and forth. So you know, you almost have your notebook and you like, okay, this question is taking me down this road. Oh, okay, hit a brick wall there. Let me go back. Let's see what the policy says. Oh, no. That shouldn't be there. Oh, no, now I have to talk about granting aid as opposed to the old age pension. You know, you'll hit different bits of the story at different moments.
And the other thing with the priorities as well is that I presume that was a national overview.
Yes, national, yeah.
Provincially, that will look different yet again.
Yeah.
You know, like the fights at a provincial level between education and social protection and, you know, community development are being had.
Yeah.
They don't appear. Yes, they might. You won't see that in the report. You won't see those.
Yeah.
Points. You gotta get in and dirt, like in the mid and be talking.
So the one reading was the spending choices, which I worked on. So I assume you read it.
Which spending choices? Not the CRD, not the
No.
not education, and not the efficiency.
The fourth one.
I saw 3, but maybe I didn't scroll. Maybe not.
Okay, unless I just popped it in there by mistake. So this is taken directly from the Parliamentary Budget Office. So you could put scare quotes on there. And according to Parliament, the budget is an annual plan for what government wants to achieve and how it will spend money to achieve those goals. It is the most important economic instrument of the government, and it's used to make sure that the state has the resources it needs to do its work, create conditions which stimulate economic growth. Now, this is a huge debate and clearly indicates the priorities of government and must be read in tandem with the Constitution. Okay.
Just to go back a step as well, I mean, and link to the other weeks, we were generally talking about care, right, and theories of care. And we were, in each of the weeks, we're talking about different forms of responsibility, who's doing care work, who's taking responsibility for care, at what level, and this is just another level. You know, whilst obviously some of our readings are on the household or in families or in the communities, this is just moving away from the nitty-gritties of families to, I'm not saying the bigger picture, another picture.
Yeah.
You know, and it all connects.
Because the other side of the diamond.
Yeah, and what you're seeing happening there, needless to say, is going to impact what's happening in families and vice versa.
Yeah. So
it's connecting them that is important too.
Yeah. So my work on social protection. So I work on social protection in especially including health. So I do health and social protection on my 2 areas. And you know, when we looked at the budget cuts that have taken place outside of the grants, so social development gets caught up within the grant story. And so it looks like it's receiving more and more money every year, but that's for grants. It's not for social welfare services or care services. And so we've been arguing that this is not a caring state because they are slashing those budgets, you know, quite profoundly. This year in particular. And we haven't finished our analysis for 2024, but I mean, it's a bloodbath. It's going to be very, very scary to see what happens in the next 3 years, given what they've done. So they cut the budgets last year. Then they announced that they've increased the budgets. What they did was they actually increased from the slash that they were going to implement last year. So they didn't actually increase the budget. They just didn't do it. They didn't cut it as much as they were planning to in October, which I'll come to just now. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to just show you a little bit about the politics of the budget. And every year, a document gets produced called the budget review. Sorry, no, not the budget, not this. Sorry, that I'm coming to. Sorry. So the purpose of the budget, reflecting government policy. So we always start with policy, and these are the key. Back in 1996, you've all heard of GEAR. Then we moved to Askisa, if you all remember. Then we have the National Development Plan. So if we want to make sense of what is being implemented in relation to the broader fiscal policy, you need to know your national development plan. You need to know what's in there. How many of you have read the national development plan?
Not word for word.
So if you're interested in education, if you're interested in health, if you're interested in hunger, that's where you go. You go and have a look and see what are they planning 2030 and what are they saying. And this is what they're saying when it comes to economic issues. I've just bulleted it. So of course the document is much thicker, but they're saying continued fiscal discipline is important through a more expansionary stance might be necessary if the EU contracts. Okay. Counter-cyclical fiscal policy, big words, and low and stable inflation are key elements of the supported macroeconomic approach. The budget should prioritize those investments that raise economic growth and that improve people's capabilities. Sounds great.
So the question I have is how do we define raising economic growth? Because from a direct level, if I just create a job, this person pays tax, and then the tax feeds into the system. Whereas if you think about the social welfare, social development is essentially when you're giving this child or allocating funds for, let's say, a social grant, and this child goes through the system through education. Essentially, there is an investment, which is somewhat indirect because, according to economists, it's not you can't put a financial something tangible.
You actually can, and that's the beauty of it. So, and this is where the fights happen between economists, heterodox and non-heterodox neoclassical economists. And there's lots of fun. You can read up all about it, and you can discover whether you're a Keynesian or neo-Keynesian or post-Calakian. There's a whole body of mostly white dead men that you can choose from. Okay, but there's a bunch of really, really interesting global South, brown women who have done incredible feminist economics work that say that investing in social programs like cash grants does have a fiscal multiplier and actually does stimulate economic growth. So for every rand spent on a child, you create 1.4, 1.5 rands, or if not more. So there is an economic imperative to it. It's just that one bunch chooses to ignore that evidence, which is fascinating. So you can go and read up on it. It's a very, very interesting debate that's taking place. And we've just done a paper, just commissioned a paper on spending in it's called the purple economy, the green economy. So what would be green jobs? What would be feminist jobs? What would be an investment as opposed to expense? And all the stuff around compensation is often argued as being an expense, but it's actually an investment because it generates income. So you can already tell which side of the debate I'm on for that.
Also, difficult
To access, it's very jargon.
to actually measure how many hours you spend
Yeah.
caring for an older person. There is no data there.
So the last time you survey that was done was in 20. I know, but even if we
I don't
had
think
one,
we used it
yeah,
as-
we haven't even had one.
Would you go and ask someone who's running a massive, national or regional survey to put 3 items on care, and you'll struggle because they're
Yes, the care economy, yeah.
yeah.
So sorry, this is where I started and it was the wrong one. So every year, the budget comes out in February. And something gets tabled with the budget called the budget review, and it's the narrative to the budget. And each one has a theme for the year. And it's beautiful because then you get to see the politics of it. Balancing development and fiscal sustainability. So fiscal sustainability is fiscal consolidation, which is austerity. Renewing the economy and restoring public finances. Restoring public finances, austerity. Transformation for inclusive growth. Do you know what happened here? Anybody know what happened in 2017? Who was around?
Changing powers, I guess.
Exactly. Very good. Then 2016, a resilient South Africa making hard choices in difficult times. Okay, also known as austerity. Building an inclusive economy for the next 20 years of freedom. Ah, so nice. A new trajectory for national development, inclusive growth and development, 12 outcomes. And transforming the South African economy at a time of crisis, a window of opportunity. So essentially, austerity, except for 2017, where there was a little bit of like stuff happening. I've cut out some. It's actually more, you know, when you have them all in line. But what I would argue is that we want to think about fiscal policy should be about creating more possibilities. And so if you get anything out of my talk today, it's this diagram. So when we're looking at budgets and we're looking at fiscal policy, and I haven't even spoken about monetary policy because that's also, but the two are not, you can't divorce the two, right? The fiscal and monetary policy. So when we're trying to make sense of the South African economy or global economy, I want to argue that we have an extractive political economy that's neo-colonial, okay? And so within it is this the kind of domination, subordination, and violence. And I don't need to say more about that. And it's based on formal work, reproductive and informal, and it's on the exploitation of work and bodies. So we talk about the care economy, and so we want to start shifting this exploitation of work and bodies. And around it is these mechanisms of extraction, dig, burn, dump. So we talk about climate change, militarization, violence, and fear. The only tricky thing about the South African context, when you look at the budget itself, is that we are actually defunding defense. So we can't go for the defense budget.
But then, can I ask a question in that regard? What does our private defense look like?
Exactly, but we don't spend a lot. I mean, compared to the US or other developing countries now, our defense budget is being defunded. Yeah, so it's a bit of a weird thing. Okay, widespread concentration of wealth and power. I mean, I gave the statistics in terms of concentration of wealth and power in this country is staggering. Patriarchy, so levels of gender-based violence, like we're interested in consumerism and individualism. Yeah, talked about that one. So what we want to do, or at least I want to encourage you to think about when you're doing your research and work, and when you're engaging with the budget, is to start trying to see, can I push for a far more living, interconnected economy or a care economy? One that centers care, belonging, and respect. So are we able to, so if we're talking about, and the SJC example is such a lovely one, because there is the resolution to inequity and injustice was temporary toilets. Like, that's not caring, nor is it belonging or respectful. Communities need houses, they need proper sanitation, they need access to land. So what are we saying about the distribution of resources in this area? So around cooperation, equity, and work bodies, so solidarity. So recognizing that our bodies are both able to rest, work. You know, there's the I don't know if you've all heard of the nap ministry. Yeah, we have the right to nap, or just get down and nap. Okay. So it's based on deep democracy, ecological and social well-being, sacred balance, regeneration, commons, and community ownership. Okay. So we really are trying to push the dial here. And sometimes you can get caught up in engaging in this content without realizing that you're just perpetuating this and not actually shifting to this, which is what I think we want to encourage ourselves to do, which requires you to ask more of your work. So yes, we're talking about old age pensions, but should we be talking about a universal basic income grant that is at least 5,500 rand or whatever? Like, I've just thrown that out. But what would give dignity and respect to families? Yeah. What time do we finish? At 4. 4-ish. 4-ish. Just before 4. Okay. I'm almost done.
Show me the timetable.
I totally misjudged this. I have 25 more slides.
Sorry, that's my fault.
No. So this is just that there's a disjunction between fiscal policy and human rights. So neoclassical economics focuses, and this is what we've been talking about, on limited fiscal deficit, trade openness, minimal state intervention, private investment, making the market mechanism work, getting prices right. So it's very embodied from what is actually needed. And yeah, it's